I opened the door that morning expecting nothing, and by evening I was standing in my own kitchen being told to pack my things. I should have seen it coming, but I didn't. I thought I knew my daughter. I thought I knew what 37 years of raising someone meant. I was wrong. My name is not important. What matters is that I am 68 years old. I lived in a house I have owned outright since 1999, a 3-bedroom on Lakeview Crescent in Sudbury, Ontario. My late husband Terrence and I bought it the year our youngest started high school. We painted every room ourselves. We refinished the hardwood floors one summer weekend when the kids were at camp. Terrence passed in 2018, and after that the house became quieter than I had ever known a house could be. My daughter called me in the spring of 2019. She said she and her husband had hit a rough patch financially. Nothing dramatic, she said, just a temporary thing. She said the word temporary, the way people say it when they mean something else entirely. I said yes before she finished asking. Of course I said yes. She's my daughter. She and her husband and their 2 kids moved into the 2 larger bedrooms upstairs. I took the small room at the back, near the laundry. I told myself it was fine. I told myself it was only temporary. That was 4 years ago. The first year was hard but manageable. My son-in-law, a tall man who worked in logistics and had a way of entering a room like he owned it already, was polite enough in those early months. My daughter and I had our rhythms. We cooked together on Sundays. We watched those home renovation shows she liked. The grandkids were underfoot constantly, loud and sticky-fingered and wonderful. But things shift, slowly then all at once. By the second year, my son-in-law had started treating the house as though he built it himself. He rearranged the living room furniture without asking. He had a friend come and fix the back fence, which had been perfectly fine, and charged the materials to a joint household account he'd suggested we open, which, in hindsight, I should never have agreed to. He began using the driveway for his truck and parking my car on the street, which in a Sudbury winter is not a small inconvenience. I said nothing. I told myself I was being generous. I told myself that this was what family did. My daughter changed too, though I didn't want to see it. She started speaking about the house in a particular way. Our house, she'd say, gesturing broadly. Our yard. Our basement. I corrected her once, gently. She looked at me with a patience that felt rehearsed. The way you look at someone you've already decided doesn't quite understand their own situation. "Mom," she said, "you know what I mean." I did know what she meant. That was the problem. By the 3rd year, I had retreated mostly to my room in the evenings. The living room had become her husband's domain. The television always on something he chose, his boots near the door, his friends coming over on Friday nights. I was not unwelcome exactly. I was just managed, tolerated, like a piece of furniture that nobody wanted to move, but nobody particularly needed either. I started spending more time at my friend Audrey's place. Audrey lived 10 minutes away in a tidy bungalow she'd inherited from her mother, and she had coffee ready by 9 every morning and never made me feel like a guest in my own life. I told her things I hadn't said aloud to anyone, about how my daughter looked at me sometimes, about how my son-in-law had started intercepting my mail, claiming he was helping me stay organized, about the Sunday dinners where I sat at my own table and felt invisible. "You need to do something," Audrey said. "It's my daughter," I said. "That's exactly why," she said. I didn't listen. Not yet. The 4th year was when the money arrived. It wasn't the lottery, it was an inheritance. Terrence's older brother Clifford had passed in February, a man I'd met perhaps a dozen times at Christmas dinners and one family reunion in Muskoka. Clifford had never married, had no children, and had spent 40 years working in oil and gas in Fort McMurray. He had more money than any of us had known. His estate took several months to settle, and when the letter arrived from the lawyer in Calgary, I sat at the kitchen table and read it 3 times before I believed it. Clifford had left his estate to be divided among Terrence's surviving family. Terrence was gone, which meant his share, a portion larger than I can still quite comprehend, passed to me as his surviving spouse. $1.4 million. I want to be honest about how I felt in that moment. I felt afraid. I felt Terrence's absence like a cold hand on my shoulder. I thought about calling my daughter downstairs and telling her right away, the way you instinctively want to share news, good or bad, with the people closest to you. I stopped myself. Something small and quiet stopped me. I don't know what to call it. Instinct, maybe. Or the memory of how she'd looked at me across that table when I'd said my house. I folded the letter and put it in the drawer of my bedside table. I told no one, except Audrey. Audrey said, "Get a lawyer before you say a word to anyone." I got a lawyer. Her name was Ms. Beaumont, sharp, direct. The kind of woman who made you feel immediately that things were going to be handled properly. I met with her twice before I said anything at home. She helped me understand what I had, what was protected, and what I needed to do to make sure it stayed that way. She helped me set up a separate account that had nothing to do with the household joint account. She helped me document things I hadn't thought to document. She also asked me gently but directly whether I felt safe in my home, whether I felt pressured, whether anyone had ever spoken to me about changing my will or my property arrangements. I sat with that question longer than she probably expected. "My son-in-law mentioned once," I said slowly, "that it would make sense for the house to be in my daughter's name. For simplicity," he said, "in case anything happened to me." Miss Beaumont wrote something down. She nodded. She didn't say anything dramatic. She didn't need to. I left her office feeling like I'd narrowly avoided something without quite knowing what. I went home that evening to find my daughter and her husband sitting at the kitchen table. They had that particular stillness that people have when they've been talking about you and have just stopped. My son-in-law had a cup of coffee in front of him. My daughter was looking at her hands. "Mom," she said, "we need to talk about the future." I sat down. I said nothing. She talked for a long time. About how the house was too big for just me, how it wasn't practical, how she and her husband had found a lovely place in a 55-plus community in Hanmer. Very nice, she said. They'd toured it. The staff were wonderful. She talked about how it would be better for everyone, how I'd have company my own age, how I wouldn't have to worry about maintaining the property. Her husband nodded along the whole time like a man watching a presentation he'd already rehearsed. I looked at my daughter while she spoke. I watched her hands move. I noticed she did not once look me in the eye. When she finished, I said, "Is this your idea or his?" The silence that followed told me everything. "Mom, that's not fair," she said. "This is my house," I said. "I own it. My name is on the deed. I bought it with your father, and I am not moving anywhere." My son-in-law's face changed. The pleasantness fell away, like a coat he'd been wearing too long. He said something about how things were going to be different now, how they'd been carrying the household, how I needed to think practically. He used the word practically 4 times in one speech. I counted. I said, "I'd like you both to go to bed. We're not going to resolve this tonight." My daughter started to cry. Real tears, I think. I don't say that to be cruel. But I had also watched her cry strategically for 67 years, and I had learned, very late, to tell the difference. I went to my room. I sat on the edge of my bed. I thought about Terrence and what he would have said. He had a way of cutting to the center of things very quietly. He would have said something like, "Well, now you know." I knew. The next morning, I called Miss Beaumont. I told her what had happened. She told me to write everything down, what was said, when, exact words where I could remember them. She said to change the password on my computer and to put anything important in a place that was mine alone. She said to stop contributing to the joint household account immediately. She also said, "You don't have to move. You cannot be legally compelled to leave your own home. I want you to know that clearly." I did know it, but hearing it from her made it real in a way that mattered. The following weeks were difficult in a way that's hard to describe. My daughter swung between coldness and sudden warmth. One day barely speaking to me, the next making me tea and sitting with me in the garden like nothing had happened. Her husband was coolly polite. The grandchildren sensed something without knowing what, the way children always do, and became louder and more physical than usual, ricocheting off the walls with all the nervous energy adults try to pretend they're not generating. I spent more time with Audrey. I also called my son in Vancouver. I should mention him. I hadn't yet because he'd been out of this story, which is how he prefers things, but he deserved to know. He was angrier than I expected. He wanted to fly out. I told him not to yet. I told him I had it in hand. I had it in hand, mostly. There was an evening in late October when I came home from Audrey's to find my daughter going through the filing cabinet in the small office off the hallway. Terrence's cabinet, which I'd kept locked for years and which I had never given anyone a key to. I stood in the doorway. She had a key I did not recognize. "What are you doing?" I asked. She startled. "I was just Dad's old paperwork. I thought maybe there were." "Close it," I said. "Close it and lock it and put that key on the kitchen table." She did. She didn't look at me. She put the key down and walked upstairs without a word. That night I moved everything important to Audrey's house. Miss Beaumont, when I told her, was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "I think it's time to have a more formal conversation." She sent them a letter. A real letter, on legal letterhead, delivered by registered mail to my own address, addressed to my son-in-law and my daughter. It outlined clearly that the property was solely in my name, that I had not transferred and did not intend to transfer any ownership interest, that I had retained legal counsel, and that should there be any further incidents involving my private documents or finances, I would pursue appropriate remedies. I was in the kitchen when my son-in-law came downstairs with the letter in his hand. He'd opened it, which was addressed to both of them. He stood there for a moment, looking at me. I was making toast. "This is how you want to do this," he said. "I'd like you to start looking for a new place to live," I said. "I'd like you to give me a reasonable timeline. I'm not asking you to leave tomorrow, but I am asking you to leave." He started talking about leases, about winter, about the kids' school. He said the word temporary again, which struck me as almost funny. I said, "You've lived in my home for 4 years, rent-free. I've been patient. I'm asking you now, formally and directly, to make a plan." He left the room. My daughter came down 10 minutes later. She didn't shout. She didn't cry this time. She looked at me with something I can only describe as tired disappointment, which was interesting, because that was exactly how I had been looking at her for the past year. "You're doing this because of the money," she said. "I'm doing this because it's my house," I said, "and I want to live in it in peace." "We needed you," she said, "when we had nowhere to go." "I know," I said, "and I was here. I'll always be your mother. But you stopped being a guest about 2 years ago." She didn't have an answer for that. They were out by March. It wasn't clean or warm. There were logistics and silences, and one very bad Sunday in February when my daughter came down and said things I hope she doesn't fully mean. But they went. They found a rental in the East End, a decent place closer to her husband's work. The grandchildren cried when they left, and I held them in the driveway longer than was comfortable for any of us. I stood in my house that first evening alone and listened to it, listened to the actual quiet of it, the refrigerator humming, the radiator ticking, the sound of my neighbor's dog somewhere down the street. I made myself dinner. I sat at my own table. I watched the news. I slept better than I had in 4 years. My daughter and I have spoken 3 times since then. The conversations are careful and short, The way conversations are when people are waiting to see who the other person is going to turn out to be. I don't know yet. I hope she gets there. I think about the girl she was, stubborn and funny and full of opinions about everything, always the first one to defend someone being treated unfairly. I think she's still in there somewhere. The money from Clifford's estate is in a managed account. I've spoken to a financial advisor at Desjardins, and I've made decisions that feel right for where I am. A portion towards secured investments, something set aside for the grandchildren's education, a small allowance for myself for the first time in a long time. I bought a new winter coat. I replaced the kitchen faucet that had been dripping since 2021. I booked a flight to see my son in Vancouver for the spring. Audrey came over last week and we sat in the garden with tea and she said, "You look like yourself again." I hadn't known I'd stopped. The house is the same house it always was. The same floors Terrence and I sanded. The same trim I painted twice because I chose the wrong shade the first time. The same window at the back that sticks every July. Nothing dramatic changed. Nobody swooped in. There was no grand confrontation, no courtroom scene, no moment where I delivered a devastating speech and watched someone crumble. There was just me, understanding finally that patience can become passivity if you're not careful, and that loving someone does not mean you owe them everything you have. The deed is in my name. It has always been in my name. I am 68 years old, and I am home. I think about that filing cabinet drawer sometimes, the one my daughter had found a key to. I think about what she was looking for, and what she thought she would do with it if she found it. And I think about who taught her that, the idea that things belonging to someone else could simply become hers if she moved close enough, waited long enough, and positioned herself carefully enough. I don't say that to wound her. I say it because I had to look at it honestly before I could understand any of it. What happened in my house over those 4 years wasn't a sudden betrayal. It was a slow accumulation of small choices. Hers, her husband's, and honestly, mine too. Every time I said nothing when I should have spoken. Every time I told myself it was temporary. Every time I chose peace over clarity. Those were my choices, and they created the conditions for everything that followed. That's not self-blame. That's just how cause and effect actually works when you're willing to look at it without flinching. What I know now is that kindness without boundaries isn't really kindness. It's a kind of confusion masquerading as love. I opened my home because I genuinely wanted to help. That impulse was good and real. But I let that generosity drift into something passive, something that communicated to the people around me that I didn't fully believe my own rights were worth asserting. And people, not bad people necessarily, but people under financial pressure with a clear path in front of them, will often walk the path that's open. I left it open for too long. The intelligence I needed wasn't cleverness. It wasn't about outsmarting anyone. It was the quieter kind, the willingness to see things as they actually were, rather than as I hoped they might be. Miss Beaumont helped me see it. Audrey helped me see it. But I had to be willing to look first. There's a kind of wisdom that only becomes available when you stop protecting yourself from an uncomfortable truth. And for a long time I wasn't ready. I am now. And the steadiness it took to get through those months, that surprised me most. I'm not a confrontational person. I never have been. But I learned that you don't have to be confrontational to be firm. You don't have to raise your voice to hold your ground. You just have to keep knowing what's true and keep acting from that place, even when it's uncomfortable, even when the person crying in front of you is someone you love very much. My daughter is not a villain. Her husband played his part, but she made her own choices. I hope she thinks about those choices. I hope the distance between us, which I feel every day, eventually becomes the kind of distance that two people can close if they're both willing to be honest. The house is still standing. The floors Terrence and I sanded are still under my feet. And I am still here, clearer, quieter, and more myself than I have been in years.